Welcome back, everybody. It is very nearly finals time here in Hearthstone Grandmasters Season 2 for the Europe region. My name is Soto, and I'm joined again by Abar, but hunterace needs just a little bit of time to recuperate after what was an incredibly grueling series. And with that in mind, Abar, I think that's what I want to talk about with you initially. You had the pleasure of casting that series. I was sat backstage watching it. I think, personally, that was a very easy series for hunterace to have lost from some of the positions that he was in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, that Priest gameplay, it felt like he dug himself back from some very unfavorable positions. I know that's something you love to see as a big Priest fan who queues it on ladder over and over again and ruins other people's experiences.
At least I'm willing to do it on my own account, unlike some other people that we found out about. But yes, there were a couple of spots in that game, like for example where he made his Northshire Cleric an 8/8 for no particular benefit immediately. But that, for example, stops his opponent trading over his Northshire Cleric and then evolving again, which is what would have happened in that situation if he had not have made that play. So because he made that play, he got to keep a Cleric for another couple of turns. Then he chooses to trade his Cleric into one of the weakest minions on board just because it has the highest health total.
Right.
And then lo and behold, 3 turns later, there's a Pyromancer in his hand and it all makes sense and suddenly the game flips on its head. That is why hunterace to me, is such a top player, why he is the top player, why he is our world champion, and why he is now one match away from doing the unprecedented and making it as a world champion back to a world championship performance. What I'm trying to say is other top players would have lost that series in hunterace's position.
There's just something about hunterace. What's truly special about him is he makes plays sometimes, or even other extremely high-level players just leave you with your head scratching, right? There are a couple of moments, one I recall in general, Dan and I were looking at trading with the Batterhead over 2 Novice Engineers on the board because it's absolutely free. It's Batterhead. You clear your opponent's minions. It helps protect you from equality clears later on down the line. hunterace just didn't. He just hit face with the Batterhead and ignored the 1/1s. I still don't know why he did that, but I know he's hunterace, and there was a very good reason he chose to do that somehow.
Yes. Yeah, I can't give you an explanation for that one either. It just seems like, what's the difference between 10 health and 12 health on your Batterhead, right? It doesn't seem to mean anything in that matchup. You always have to, even as a commentator, you have to question yourself whenever, it looks like hunterace made a mistake. You don't want to do that, right? You want to trust your instincts and be critical of the things that you feel critical about. But whenever there's hunterace involved, you always think, he's smarter than me. He clearly has a plan here. But yeah, I think it was an incredible series, and that incredible series has now led him to this point where he goes up against my boy Casie in the finals of the Europe region, and hunterace has the token Evolve Shaman, which was for a second looking like it might be the deck to let him down in that series after you've put so much stock into it coming into this. But I think that's the big difference between what we see here from hunterace's lineup and what we saw previously from Silvername's lineup. It's the variety of Shaman, and it's the Holy Wrath Paladin instead of the Zoo. So how do you see those coming into play in the series?
So it's interesting. I have been sort of downplaying Casie's Warrior a little bit over the course of the best-of-3 portion of this tournament, but I think it might prove to be quite valuable for him in this matchup, so much so that if he does not protect it, it very well might get banned. I'm looking at hunterace's lineup. The more aggressive token Shaman, while I like it in a lot of matchups, it doesn't have the ability to take Warrior long in quite the way that the Quest Shaman does,
right?
Which Warrior was not a deck that I expected to be popular if I were to have built a lineup for this particular tournament. So it's a liability. The Warrior is for him if he queues his Shaman. The Warrior looks like it's built lean enough where it should be slightly advantage against Priest because the cards that Casie cut to fit in this N'Zoth package were the other expensive taunt minions anyway.
Right.
So I do like the way that this Warrior looks against his Priest. And then, of course, the OTK Paladin versus Warrior is a matchup that sort of goes back and forth on who exactly is favored based on the specific tech choices. But it's at least close enough that I like the way that Casie's Warrior looks against a range of hunterace's decks.
Yeah, I think important about the Warrior deck is to note that, we've debated for pretty much 8 weeks straight at this point exactly what the Priest-Warrior matchup looks like from everyone's perspective. I think it's fairly comfortable now that if anyone's going to call any build of Warrior favored, prior to the Doom in the Tomb event, it would be the list that plays Whirlwind, double Plague of Wrath, double Brawl, and all of the other removal, right? That's the build that really beats Priest. Well, forgetting about all of the N'Zoth package nonsense and the Youthful Brewmaster in this case, it still plays all of those cards.
Right.
So I still think it's a pretty effective deck in the Priest matchup. So I think that can be a very big deal. But I think Casie's best of 5 lineup now does put a lot of pressure on this Warrior because he has got to ignore it up until this point. And, you know, in the series that we've cast, it certainly looked like it's been a deck that he's been glad to ignore almost because of some of the things that he's come up against. So interesting now that with the pressure on, when he has to play it, he's up against a series that, well, looks like it might finally pay out for him. Casie, nice to see him back on webcam here. He won in, let's say, less than fulfilling circumstances in his previous series. Not the way he would have wanted to go out, but hopefully he's been able to adjust to the situation rightly, and he's in a good mental state for this series.
Yeah, and I do want to address that. I was watching the match backstage. The fact that Silvername queued that Druid specifically queued into Casie's Druid, and that was the deck that got a free win on Casie's side due to Silvername's error. Was very unfortunate for Silvername because that loss was in essence worth more than one loss. Casie's Druid deck should have had an extremely difficult time getting through Silvername's lineup. He still had a combo Priest, which is heavily favored, as I've mentioned a couple times over the course of the weekend. 74% over the course of the regular season favored for the Priest. Silvername still had his Zoo. Zoo went 10-0 against Druid in the regular season of Season 2. That was a heavily favored matchup to queue into Casie's Druid, and the Druid got through for free. That was massive.
As you see, picks and bans are now in, or protects and bans, I should say. Double Priest Protect. Paladin banned away on hunterace's side. Druid banned away on Casie's side. Now, the Paladin ban is interesting, but it's something that I do want to follow up on because you were breaking down, you know, how the Paladin lined up in the matchup, how Casie's Warrior lined up in the matchup. I do want to point out that in this Warrior deck, there is 0 copies of Weapons Project, which does make a huge difference in that Paladin matchup, so that might be a big part of the reason as to why Casie chooses to pay respects to that Paladin so much from hunterace's side.
Yeah, it is still somewhat of a head-scratcher for me. Of course, Casie has his own Quest Shaman, which lines up rather poorly against that Paladin, but I have found the Druid versus Paladin matchup, which was close to 50-50 prior to the patch, is now heavily Druid-favored, specifically due to the introduction of Kun.
Casie is down to 1 Ferocious Howl in his list, though.
That is fair.
Which does offset that to some degree.
But there you see hunterace's lineup as well. The combo Priest, the aggressive Token Shaman, and the Quest Druid, and Casie will be leading with the combo Priest, as is tradition, as is the way of Season 2 of Hearthstone Grandmasters.
Indeed, and so far throughout playoffs, it has to be said that the Priest gods have been kind to Casie with some of the opening hands that he's had available. He has still had to engineer through situations very, very well, but he's certainly been given the tools to do so. And, you know, part of that is just a few fortunate draws. Part of that is just him understanding extremely well what the mulligan is in the Priest mirror that he's come into. But hunterace here, if this graphic is the indication of the opening match, is going Quest Druid right off the bat, which in a best of 5, when you're expecting a Priest queue to come out of the other side, which has been the most common choice by far. What's the statistics, Abar? What's the win rate of Priest versus Druid in Grandmasters?
74%.
Yeah, you don't want to play that matchup too much, do you?
You don't, and I don't think the introduction of Kun the Forgotten King made the matchup all that much better on the Druid side. hunterace does have 1 mind control tech in his list, which could prove to be useful, both for its ability and for the way that it will force Casie to play his turns a little bit differently in fear of it. I'm not sure that's enough to consistently get hunterace across the finish line, but at least he's got going for him that the Priest gods were somewhat less favorable this time around to Casie.
They were indeed, and this is where it matters most as we get into game. hunterace versus Casie, 8 weeks of Hearthstone play, round-robin play into elimination brackets have led up to this point. This is for your Season 2 Champion of Europe title and also a spot at BlizzCon at the Global Finals.
So, Saddle, coin River Crocolisk.
Sign me up. And a minion that you can put into play that deals damage to your opponent. And when your hand is Divine Shield, Power Word Shield, Divine Spirit, Inner Fire, you start to be very interested in hitting your opponent with a 10-10 on turn 3.
Yes, already it is out of Wrath range. And crucially, Casie will be able to buff up its attack power along with this Divine Shield Inner Fire on the following turn to get in some damage even before the Oasis Surger phase of the game has begun.
Yes.
I know how you feel about Oasis Surger, Sottle.
Screw that card so much. But yeah, I was going to mention this. You know, I had to do the big match intro instead, but you made the point that the Priest Gods might not have been kind to Casie in this position. I think Divine Spirit and Inner Fire actually have a pretty high win rate in the opening hand against Druid for this exact reason. Like, you just need a big thing to start hitting your opponent with. One of the only counterplays you get against this in a lot of situations is Loti on 3 in poison mode specifically. Right. And then if you also have a Pyromancer in your hand to go along with that, then you can have that checked as well.
So hunterace took that previous turn very quickly. I was actually looking at innervating out 2 3/3 Oasis Surgers.
Okay.
And then if Casie decides to go face with his 10/10, then you can follow that up with Swipe.
Interesting.
And then that would clear the 10/10 off the board. Obviously, that is pretty easily countered by something like the Injured Tol'vir, a taunt protecting the Neferset Ritualist. You also have to lose both your Innervate and give up 1 proc on your quest.
Yep.
So it is a bit of a desperation play.
Yes.
It appears that hunterace feels less desperate than I did at a quick glance in this scenario. He very fast snapped off that Ferocious Howl and moved on with his life.
Yep. So like Taunt Minion, 2 Beaming Sidekicks, 1 remaining Power Word Shield, 1 extra Arms, all stop that plan at that point. I think it's a little bit scary, as you say, but I think you make the right call, whereas it's just a sign of, it's an indication of just how desperate you may or may not feel in the situation, right?
What?
hunterace gets to do the same thing a turn later, while completing his quest, essentially here.
Job done.
Okay, single 5/5 mode though.
Don't see that too often, but it makes sense. I mean, if he value trades with 2 3/3 bodies, there's a very good chance there's a wild Pyromancer on the other side, but ignore all that, he's dead.
Priest! It's about all that needs to be said right there. I can rehash out the old tweet that I made when I was calling for sweeping changes on Priest as a class, because I think personally it polarizes way too far between being unplayable and overpowered.
Yeah.
A lot of that like really falls back on like the inherent design of the classic set of the class. So I made this tweet calling for big changes. I think as much as I enjoy playing the deck, I also completely understand that the majority of the community cannot bear playing against it, and that it's kind of detrimental to the situation. But the one caveat that I added to that tweet is that you have zero sympathy from me if you are playing Druid. Like, if you skip 4 turns in the early game and you get hit in the face by a 10-10 or a 12-12 or an 18-18 or whatever it is, what did you expect was going to happen, right? Like, play your cards in the early game, play a deck that can compete with it 1-for-1. You are always going to concede to almost one matchup in the game regardless of what deck you play, and that is it for Druid. It's Priest. Like, you just have to accept that as a loss if you're going to play Druid.
Just you wait till I get to 10 mana, I believe is what Millhouse Mana Storm says in the tutorial.
Yes.
While we're calling people out for stuff, speaking of Priest nerfs, I believe both you and Frodan said that the that the nerf to more arms was uncalled for, unnecessary. Priest was fine. There was no reason to do that, and I said you two are a couple of dinguses. Priest is still tier 1. You said you're an idiot, Abar.
This is an entirely factual representation of what happened, and I will entirely hold my L on that one. Thank you very much. Quest Druid again, coming out from hunterace, is going back to the well. This build of the deck, not massively dissimilar to what we were seeing before. He is down to 1 copy of Swipe in the deck, which is a little bit unusual compared to how some other people have built it. Obviously, you have to make a space in the deck for that Kun the Forgotten King. No Emperor in his deck. We have been seeing that in a few Druid builds, but I believe only in Mali Druids in terms of the Grandmasters list submitted for playoffs.
Yes, Swipe going down to 1 copy seems like a reasonable concession to make. The Mind Control tech also that's in there gives you some game against Shaman, which is part of the reason you want Swipe to begin with. However, the Mind Control tech has a little bit more utility in the Priest matchup, I would say. So you had to make room somewhere. I don't mind shaving 1 Swipe in this position.
Good card in this matchup, though, I would argue.
It is.
We've been over it multiple times, but for those viewers who have not been obsessive enough to follow every minute of Hearthstone Grandmasters, how do you feel this matchup has changed since the new wildcards have rotated back in?
So the addition of the Desert Hare Evolve package has significantly made this matchup more favored for the Shaman. Prior to the release of the new patch, it was very, very close to 50-50. The data would say that it was marginally Druid favored. You would argue that it was marginally Shaman favored, if I may speak for you. But with Desert Hare Evolve, the potential to create a mid-game board state that is just so overwhelming that Druid has no response to significantly shifted the matchup in favor of the Shaman. The one thing the Druid has going for it is that the addition of Kuhn the Forgotten King into the Quest Druid deck list has made the burn plan much harder for the Quest Shaman. So it isn't all bad news if you're hunterace fans out there.
Yeah, I think that is a very fair assessment. I think the one thing that Druid really had going for it in this matchup is that it successfully cheated mana a lot better and a lot more consistently than the Quest Shaman did. And now the Shaman has the ability to cheat mana both with Mogu Fleshshaper Mutate and just the card Evolve. They can actually get further ahead of the game than cards like Nourish or whatever give to the Druid, right? Like 3-4 drops in play on turn 3 is not okay a lot of the time. Like that's not a thing that most decks are equipped to deal with. Not much going on for Casie so far. He has just played his biggest guy and he has gone face on every given turn up until this point.
Yep, I rattled off a bunch of cards that are new to this Shaman deck that are really good in the matchup, and we have seen none of them.
Right.
So we're playing with the rest of our deck on Casie's side of things. The Mogu Fleshshaper not at its best against Druid. However, the addition of Evolve has made it more consistently be able to achieve 8-drop status now that we don't have just the mutates to rely on, and 8-drops are very good against Druid.
I did not think I was going to ask this question before Casie made an action. I actually didn't. But what do you think of this barista this turn? It's not the highest value barista you'll ever see, but the alternative was Sludge Slurper and hope that that just gives you an entire turn, which kind of seemed ambitious in this spot. You like this barista coming down?
It's one of the highest tempo baristas you'll ever see. I will say that compared to the rest of Casie's options in this particular given turn.
Yep.
Yeah, these are not the optimal minions with Battlecry that you want to be returning to your hand with the barista in this particular matchup. But frankly, sometimes you have to make the best of a bad situation, and this particular play sets up the other resources in Casie's hand to perform much stronger.
hunterace looks offended right now as to how badly this series is going for him so far. Gets absolutely beaten up in the Priest matchup, just hit with a 10-10 and then hit with a 20-10 and then the game was over. And now he's made it to turn 5 with Druid and he really just does not have any power card available to him. No Nourish, no Oasis Surger, no Starfall. Those are the 3 cards, 6 copies in total that he would have been looking for here. Not to mention that he in fact does play the card Worthy Expedition twice in his submitted deck list for this tournament, which can help him find any of those cards on top of that.
Would you say this isn't the highest value Elise the Explorer you've ever seen?
That would be an understatement, but an accurate statement nonetheless.
Or Elise the Enlightened, rather.
Of course it's the right way.
Highly educated version of Elise.
Oh, goodness, there's a Desert Hare. Board space? Casie, did we not want to... Did it not work if we just Desert Hared and then Mogu'd without playing the Questing Explorer? His Mogu would have cost 3. Desert Hare would have discounted it to 0.
You still have the option to throw away the 2/3 body of your Questing
Okay,
Explorer.
yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Oh.
And then it goes back to 1. Yep.
Six minions on Casie's side, 1 on hunterace's. Will make this Mogu still cause 0 mana.
Boop.
And Casie gives a thumbs up. He might be happy.
We've been waiting for it all weekend, Abar. The boy is in the pool. Ragnaros off the Evolve. I'm sorry, Casper. I'm very excited about it, but I feel for your position right now. The headphones come off for a second. hunterace is rightly aggrieved with the situation. He has not been given any help by the game in this series so far. Whew.
I get the impression hunterace is going to be spending the rest of his duration in this game recovering mentally, frankly. I think that this one is over. But yeah, he was taking some time to give himself a little break there, and deservedly so.
So that is now a win for the Shaman and a win for the Priest on Casie's side. His Druid, his banned, which leaves him with the N'Zoth Control Warrior as his last hurdle that he needs to leap over before he can land with a spot at BlizzCon.
And I hypothesized that this Warrior deck might be strong enough in the matchup that it might pull a ban from hunterace's side. I think the odds it finds one game win over the course of 3 attempts are incredibly high. As there you see the N'Zoth Control Warrior build from Casie. He has added in 2 copies of the Kartut Defender, along with Sylvanas, which has been reintroduced to the standard metagame, Emperor Thaurissan as well, and N'Zoth the Corruptor. So playing a lot of the new cards here, instead of the package of Tomb Wardens that we are used to seeing.
Yes, crucially still has almost all of the good removal options against Priest, which is a matchup that's going to be very relevant here. The only thing he's missing is those weapons projects, which can be very good early on. If you pick up a 1-drop of your own, then your weapons project then helps you to contest Northshire Clerics and Injured Tolviz in the early game as Warrior. Also, that weapons project is a big loss in that Paladin matchup, but that's the one that's not going to matter because it's the deck that has been banned out from Casie here. And once again, hunterace just back to the well one more time on this Quest Druid. It can't possibly go wrong 3 times in a row, can it, Abar?
Well, it is less likely to go wrong this time around, I will say, than it did the previous 2 sessions. This Druid was very much the liability in hunterace's lineup against Casie's lineup. So hunterace going with the strategy of, well, this deck has to get a win eventually. I'm going to start with this one and see if I can get it out of the way. Take my more favorable matchups later on down the line.
So, big talking points here in the Druid matchup. Casie's deck does not play any Super Colliders, which are huge in this matchup.
Yes.
They can save you. 1 Super Collider can potentially save you 2+ board clears, just because it can so effectively contest, 6/6 Hidden Oasis minions, Oasis Surger in particular. It lines up so beautifully against. You almost always have the health total to invest into doing that, so that's not a problem. And so without that card, you do have to have minions in play to fight, and you have to use more removal. But in place of that, the opportunity to just generate a couple of N'Zoth boards in this matchup, how big a deal do you think that's going to be?
I think it is a massive deal because even though the Warrior will play a lot of this game from behind, large N'Zoth boards is something that Druid just struggles to deal with in general. I also think, going back to your point about the lack of a Super Collider, Sylvanas compensates for that somewhat.
Yeah.
Something that I identified within like the first hour after the new patch was released is that Sylvanas is somewhat of a natural predator to the Oasis Surger. They put 2 5/5s on the board, you put a Sylvanas on the board, you trade it into one of them and steal the other. You always end up with a 5/5 at the end of that interaction.
Right.
So that sort of covers you a little bit from your lack of Super Collider.
Sure. Yeah, Sylvanas has kind of always been a natural predator of Druid in general, right? Like, if you think back to the original Sylvanas metagame, as Sylvanas would come down and other decks would go, okay, cool, I'm going to, like, pop open my Haunted Creeper and then play some other small minions and then trade into your guy and, like, oh, you stole a 1/1, big deal. Whereas Druids just sat there, like, the smallest minion in their deck is, like, a freaking 4/6. And I'm like, well, what do I do with this? That Sylvanas is just going to wreck me. I think that is very much the case here with this Druid deck from hunterace.
So many of the words you just said got my nostalgia flowing there.
Dude, Haunted Creeper, Nerubian Egg, power overwhelming meta. Oh, what a time.
And then it died horribly.
Yeah. Then we had Patron for a while and everything was beautiful and glorious.
And then it died horribly.
Yes! Dude, Patron handlock combo Druid meta, best meta of all time. Fight me.
I will not. Although I spent most of that metagame playing Zoo, personally, but
sure.
You know.
Most people spent most of that meta playing Secret Paladin, which is what made playing Patron all the more exciting. You could just farm them on a daily basis. It was excellent.
I also spent a significant portion of that meta playing Dreadsteed Baron Rivendare combo.
Because of course you did.
patron into it as many times as you want, Subtle. Come back.
I'm getting traumatized just thinking about that. Or turn 6 incoming, hunterace has tried to cycle. He's ripped the Worthy Expedition, and you see his reaction.
Do you think there's one card in particular he might have been looking for?
I think the card might just be Nourish.
Now, was it because you wanted 2 additional mana crystals and 3 additional cards, or did you want these new Basalt Defenders and play for 0 mana?
The first one.
Okay.
The second one is also a very, very nice upside. But Nourish in general, you can see he already has Scenarius in his hand. If he plays the Nourish, he draws cards, he gets additional threats. Like, without Nourish, okay, occasionally you're going to draw a big threat, and you're going to play a big threat. But there's these off turns. It's the valleys between the peaks of your pressure that Control Warrior will use to get onto the board and stabilize. So you need to have that Nourish to make sure your hand size is secure, and you can essentially just bomb chain your opponent. Play a threat every turn, so there is no let up, there is no time for them to just have a free turn to develop. Meanwhile, I do want to ask you a question. I personally would have felt it was somewhat important to hit a N'Zoth or Youthful Brewmaster or something to potentially get multiple N'Zoths in the matchup. Casie chose not to do that and just tempo out his Emperor. Are you at all surprised by that?
Job's done.
I am, in that it feels like you will need the value of both N'Zoths over the course of this game to keep up.
Right.
Obviously, Casie has value in the form of additional cards with his Archivist Elysiana, but I mean value in the forms of putting a lot of minions on the board at the same time. I'm actually curious if the fact that Casie is so far ahead in tempo already this game is weighing on his decision, and he wanted to keep the pressure up. We saw this happen actually the last time when Casie was queuing this Control Warrior into Silvername's Malygos Druid. Casie got significantly ahead on board,
yes.
and Silvername was forced to use reactive resources to sort of keep himself in the game. The difference is, in this particular game, this Druid is trying to win on tempo. Like, eventually that is how it wants to win the game. Silvername was fine sitting around playing on the back foot for a little while because the game always ended in him winning with OTK potential if it got that far.
Which I do think that totally makes sense to like tempo your Emperor in the Malygos Druid matchup, because like a second and third N'Zoth are not going to get you anywhere. Like, you're going to play your first N'Zoth and then the Malygos Druid is just going to kill you immediately, right? Like, your N'Zoth just doesn't matter. Whereas I'm sure Casie has far more experience in this situation, but I presume what this indicates is that, you know, 2 Brawls, 2 Plague of Wraths, and the 1 N'Zoth board. Because I'm not even necessarily looking at the N'Zoth board as like a thing that hits your opponent in the face and ends the game, as much as it's a thing that like clears one massive board that they can make, right? And like functions as a Brawl or a Plague of Wrath for you in that regard. So I'm just curious as to whether you might need 2 of those in the matchup, but it's pretty clear that Casie feels that no is the answer to that question.
Sometimes when you play control decks, even though your ultimate goal is to exhaust your opponent out of resources, if you use your own resources proactively enough, it causes you to pick up value trades along the way, force your opponent to take slower turns along the way to the point where they don't have the counter threat potential later on that can create a situation where you don't need as many answers because you accrued answers over the course of the game in the form of value trades.
Yes. I first had this explained to me watching Zalae's stream a couple of years ago when he started talking about, as he put it, the value of going face, which is essentially the same thing you're describing, where like just by being aggressive, you can force your opponent to use their cards for lower amount of value while you are using your cards for higher amount of value, and therefore by being aggressive, by playing for tempo, by putting stats on the board and pushing the initiative, you actually gain value, even though common wisdom would suggest that the opposite happens because you're playing so aggressively. Every time I look down at hunterace's camera, the state of misery has just increased by an order of magnitude. This man just wears his heart on his sleeve while he is playing Hearthstone. Like, he cares so much, and I think that is incredibly commendable in what he does. He really, honestly, and truly wants to win every game of Hearthstone he has ever played. And in that moment, it's the most important thing that exists in his life.
The one thing we can appreciate about seeing our world champion with his head buried in his desk is it gives us a better angle on those luscious golden locks. Gotta look at the silver lining.
The silver lining of his golden locks. I don't know whether that was deliberate, but it was quite poetic nonetheless.
For no one.
You know it was deliberate, Dottle. Come on now.
The
10 armor portion of Boon, much less relevant of a resource in this matchup. However, the 0 mana 7/7 portion, yeah, I'll cash in on that sooner rather than later.
Yes. As of right now, none of those enormous board clears are available for Casie, but crucially, because he's been so aggressive, because he's so ahead on board, he can answer this board quite reasonably without having to use a board clear whatsoever.
There are so many Control Warrior players, Control Warrior haters rather, out there right now that are disgusted by the fact that you called that reasonable.
What was unreasonable about that?
It's rather efficient.
Yeah.
Some might argue too efficient to be just.
I see what you're saying.
I think it's fine.
Acolyte in play, Casie is going to need to draw some cards. His deck does not play a ton of card draw, and that's another reason why you know, hunterace is so frustrated having not found his Nourish up until now with 10 cards left in his deck. Because that's the other way to kind of look at it, right? Like, it doesn't matter if every card in the Warrior's deck is going to line up 1-to-1 and beat every card in the Druid's deck. If the Druid can play all of those cards by turn 10, turn 12 of the game, and by that point the Warrior has only drawn 14, 15 cards at that point, like, the Druid's just going to win, right? Like, 12 cards in a Warrior deck does not beat your entire deck. So you can see that now Casie is just kind of low on resources already. There is a corner just ready to be turned here from hunterace. He can put on some pressure over the next few turns. Casie nods. Don't know if he's seen his draw step just yet on his live feed. I imagine not, because if he had, I'm sure cards would be in play by now. This Warpath hitting the Acolyte is a massive deal. That's the reason it was preloaded on the previous turn. I think this was the plan that Casie set up. And now that first big sweeper, the Plague of Wrath, has been found.
hunterace invested a lot of resources into that board state, even though he has seen 0 AoE out of Casie so far this game. That might have looked curious to a lot of you at home, but due to the unfortunate start hunterace had to this game, he actually needs to create hand space to get this Nourish going, to activate this Elise later on. So he knew that that was a risk, but he didn't have any other options.
Yeah, do you think also maybe there was some indication on his part, like based on Casie just doing bits and pieces and leaving some minions on the board, that there wasn't a big board clear on the previous turn available to Casie, and he just kind of tried to push all in where he could to try and get some damage?
Maybe. I think at this level of play, hunterace could have suspected that Casie was trying to bait him into a significant board state, especially with that Warpath being all the way on the left side of Casey's hand for quite a while now.
Right.
I imagine it was something he had considered in his decision-making process. Elise and Zephyrus now active, of note.
But Cenarius used, Kun the Forgotten King used King Phaoris, the only major significant threat left in hunterace's deck outside of whatever Zephyrus route he decides to go down.
You've mentioned a couple times now the lack of weapons project in Casey's deck that is strangely relevant in the Druid matchup, where Tyrion off of Zephyrus is very common. hunterace values the Innervate over an additional card here. He could have triggered the Crystal Merchant this turn.
That is very true.
Rather not.
Interesting. I wonder what that's about.
6+5 is a very, very common breakpoints in the Druid archetype.
Yes.
Which makes the Innervate's valuable, even scaling well into the late game. He might have intentions to smooth out an 11-mana turn later on.
He might just really feel like that an extra Wisp wins the game.
If anyone except for hunterace did, I'd call them an idiot. But hunterace, if he did it because he needed the Wisp, I'd be like, yeah, it's probably correct.
He just gets the Wisp. He reverse sweeps this series. He gets on interview with us, qualifying for BlizzCon. He's just like, yeah, do you like that play where I saved the Innervate for the extra Wisp?
Yeah.
That Wisp won the game. I'm like, yeah,
Somehow would have been 1 damage off if not for the Wisp.
Like, yeah, we saw it. We saw it. We're smart. Reality check, though. He's got a long way to go before any reverse sweep is even remotely possible. The only sweep that is looking likely in this series is the 3-0 sweep to Casie, where we stand. This second Kartut defender essentially is the 3rd and 4th Kartut defender that will then appear in that N'Zoth when it comes out. So that will be essentially a full board with Sylvanas and with 4 Kartut defenders, all of which then come back with Reborn. So functionally 8 Kartut defenders come out of these 2 Kartut defenders that you play over the course of the game. You want to apply some very twisted logic to it.
Only production could have cued yakety sax for us as you went through that description.
Our home, our tombs.
But it is what I am curious about. Like, what is the N'Zoth timing here for Casie? Does he want to pressure with it? Does he want to use it as a response to, the biggest possible board that hunterace can make, so that he doesn't have to respect that board with a board clear? And because it's the difference between, is Casie trying to pressure and win the game, or is he just trying to fatigue hunterace? I think if he's trying to fatigue him, he will just use it purely defensively when he sees a big board come out from the opponent.
I agree with you that I think that his intention is to use this N'Zoth primarily as a reactive tool. It, if nothing else, makes Sylvanas particularly key, whereas your opponent develops a significant board. Sylvanas very efficiently deals with it, even if the minions trade over your Kartut defenders. If you use it proactively, you sort of expose yourself to those potentially high-value minions on complicated board states, going down to Starfalls.
Yeah, crucial as well. Casie played a single Snip Snap this game, so his death rattles are 1 Snip Snap, 1 Sylvanas, and 4 Kartut defenders, which means he is guaranteed that outcome currently from his N'Zoth. That is exactly what he will get every single time.
Time waits for no one.
Do you have a plan from hunterace's side right now, Abar?
I'm trying so hard to come up with one. Seems like it has to start with this.
Mortuary machine.
Starving
plays
buzzard.
A minion. Very important.
Yes.
Plays a minion on Mortuary Machine. When your opponent plays a minion, give it Reborn. Obviously, most of what comes back from N'Zoth, which is what I was referring to in this situation, does come back with Reborn anyway, those 4 Kartut defenders. But an extra Reborn Sylvanas certainly wouldn't be bad. And yes, just in case you weren't around in the Buzzard Unleash Hunter days, there is a little quick look at Starving Buzzard for you as well.
Also worth noting, if Casie had any curiosities about the shape of hunterace's hand, he should get a very clear hand read at this point, that there are 2 5-drops that just entered the board, so both the Starfalls are over there.
Yes.
6-drop cues you on the Nourish, and of course the Wisp suggests the Innervate is over there as well. So Casie almost assuredly knows exactly what hunterace's hand looks like from this point.
And the 6-drop itself is actually pretty crucial in the situation. The fact that it leaves behind a board presence afterwards, I think here influenced Casey's decision. Obviously, in a lot of spots like that, you will see the player summon the microbots first, so that they have a better brawl, they have a bigger chance to win the brawl. But in that spot, since there was going to be these Vengeful Scrolls, I believe they're called, yes indeed, left on the board, he decided to go afterwards with the microbots to trade some of the space away. Abar currently furiously counting things in hunterace's hand.
I am indeed. So even if we toss this Innervate away, we will not copy our entire hand with Elise the Enlightened. Elise reads from left to right, so the Oasis Surger would be the card. Does not enter our hand in that situation that we might value. However, we don't really have the luxury of trying to cash in on this Oasis Surger now. It feels like Elise has to come down here to make sure that we keep the wave of King Feorizes going.
Seems like a perfectly acceptable plural. Sure, we'll go for it.
Star? Wow.
Starfall your own guy. Crucially, 5 damage to your guy. Still AoE the opponent's side, as you see there, is a very little known interaction.
hunterace basically thought through everything that I just described and came up with a way more clever solution.
Yeah, one extra thing that you did not consider. So there is now the timing.
Snip Snap has Rush. We missed that one. That's what Casey's emoting about.
That is true, yep. Snip Snap has Rush. 4 points of removal to the board there.
So, back over to hunterace's side here. He can develop a few waves of board presence. But if he just Feoris here, he's very likely to just die. So then the question is...
almost certainly just dead at that point, right?
Yeah. So we have to spend this turn Oasis Surging through the first half of card 2 Defenders so that our cheeky little scrolls Vengeful Scrolls.
Time waits for no one.
Finish off the second half, or alternatively, take a turn off with Starfall.
Yeah, this is what I was kind of looking at, using the Starfalls instead. The additional problem, on top of everything else right now, also hunterace loses his biggest minion to the Sylvanas, just to kind of top off how he feels this series is going for him. But on top of all of this, he is out of Hidden Oasis. He hasn't managed to duplicate any. Obviously, he's out of cards, so he doesn't have any left in his deck. Therefore, this fatigue clock is incredibly real on him right now. Ferocious Howl just increases that clock. That's the only form of armor gain that he has, health gain that he has, and it's just going to make him die faster in the long run.
Sottle, I think it's crucial I point out right now, for the purpose of journalistic integrity, that Elise was the minion that hunterace would have preferred Casie to take there, as he wanted his scrolls to trade into card 2 Defenders, and regardless of what was stolen, it was going to die to the Starfall.
Sure. I mean, the 5/2s and the 1/1s just trade the same, right? Regardless?
Yeah, but it feels better.
Sure, okay, yeah. I mean, I would flip that argument by saying that Casie would feel better stealing the big one. Where do we go with this now, Ava?
I think we probably end it.
Okay. Yeah, all right, good call, good call.
Auger's pretty sweet.
Not sweet enough, though.
Yeah, hunterace still has quite a bit of board presence to chew through, AoE to have to manage effectively, and his life total is ticking. He's reached the fatigue stage. These Ferocious Howls are both useless in his hand. I believe even if Casie does nothing, he has 4 turns left. Would be 13 damage over 4 turns, and then Casie zaps him.
Yep, so even if he just swings into something now, he is absolutely dead to 2, 3, 4, 5 at this point. The zap face would just make him dead to 2, 3, 4 from this point. So that's where I'm at. Warpath the board away. 4-path, push minions face, zap face.
This would be a good time for a master plan.
It's like game over to me.
If you just showed me strictly the player cams here, it looks like game over to me.
Yes. It has been a noble fight from hunterace, an incredible run through the season. 13 games undefeated through the end of Season 1 and Season 2 in league play. Topped his league once again and made it all the way to the finals, improving his position from last season by 1 spot. But it is, unfortunately for hunterace, unfortunately for our world champion, but very, very fortunately for people who are fans of high-octane speed Hearthstone, looks like very much Casie that's going to be the one getting over the line here. Casie pretty much just going through the motions here. Minor details between Dynomatic and using just the microbots to clear here, but this is going to be a fatigue tick of 3 here. And no matter what hunterace does, Casie will just be able to pass back to hunterace to end the game.
But he plays the Elysiana anyway. All right, Sada, what's your take here? I think you went
Gadgetzan Auctioneer looks pretty powerful. I like the Bloodsworn Mercenary. That's a really, really strong card. Doomsayer, definitely don't want to be under any pressure from your opponent in these spots. Very, very smart picks from Casie. He finds his way through, and my boy, Complexity's own Casie, is going to be joining us, Abar, at BlizzCon.
I imagine you are quite elated, as much of a Casper fan as you are.
Yes.
I asked you for your predictions when we got here this morning on who was going to win from both regions. And you said Casie. You didn't even look at the decks. You
That's not true.
Casie. Said he's just better than everybody else.
I said, okay, so I said head picks. I will take Casie to beat Silvername, and I think hunterace beats Casie in the final. And I think that's what you agreed with as well,
yes.
right? Which would have been your prediction. But yeah, I love Casper. I genuinely do think he is the best player in the world. I think he is a rare example in Hearthstone of someone that is so good that he has just been able to consistently demonstrate that he can win, like, against all odds, like, overcome the fact that there are a lot of random elements in the game that we play. Like, he is so good that he overcomes that. He's the points leader. He's the world champion. He wins his groups in Grandmasters. Like, time and time again, hunterace shows that he is that good. But obviously, Casie, friend of mine, teammate, I'm always rooting for him, and I think he is a phenomenal player as well. And you don't have to hear from me anymore, because I do believe that we have Casie standing by. Casie, can you hear us?
Hey, guys.
Casie, we did it, buddy. You're going to BlizzCon. How do you feel?
I'm feeling amazing. I don't want to yell. I'm so happy. I just, the game against Thais, I actually had, when I saw his Cleric and then Pyroman and then and Circle of Healing, I was so close to crying because I wanted to win. And then I didn't only want it to win for myself, but for Bunny. Like, last year, he made it to Worlds. Now I made it. And I made it for my whole practice group and all my friends that helped me. And at the start of this season, after I lost to Boar Control's Elysiana that got pulled off a Bleed and Decoy, I uninstalled the game for 1 day. I was so sad at myself. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Do I do the pick and ban phase wrong or anything? And I'm like, okay, Bunny told install the game again, and now we practice again. We don't stop. And then Radu came together, and then I'm just excited. I'm super happy. Right as I won, Fino messaged me and in caps lock, my big boy, let's meet in the finals. And yes, I want to meet Fino in the finals. That's all I'm asking for. I'm so happy. Oh.
Well, you heard it here first. For the folks at home, step 1 to becoming a Hearthstone Grandmaster, install the game. But Casie, yes, you have been consistently over the course of Season 2 of Hearthstone Grandmasters, I feel, ahead of the meta, ahead of the curve with your deck building skills. RDU has given you a lot of credit for that as well. Do you feel that you earned an edge over the course of these finals with your decks?
I think I earned an edge in the pick and ban phase because his Paladin is really bad against my Druid, and it's one of his favorite decks, and probably against my lineup the second best. So he banned his worst matchup, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make my Warrior have 3 favorables. I banned his Paladin, so I gained like a little 5% in that pick and ban phase. And I think the Warrior is underrated. It's not the best deck, like it's worse than Druid, Shaman, or Priest, but I think it's better than Paladin if you get to ban the Paladin, which is like your only bad matchup right now. And like the build of it is not that insane, but like the core of Nithod and all the removals is better than Tomb Warden. So I think we did a good job this weekend.
I think you've done a good job throughout the whole season in terms of the lists that you've brought. But I do want to ask you, we didn't talk to you really at all over the last few days because we wanted to let the players just focus on consecutive back-to-back matches. Were there any, apart from like the Tice moments that you picked out, like were there any particular moments that stood out to you as particularly interesting or like particularly swingy in terms of the matches?
It was like mostly the game from Psycho where he played his banker, and then yesterday it happened again to Massey. Like I think this is like Massey's only like I think this was the most interesting play because I think most of the time it's actually right because you can't expect a Shaman to deal 5 damage and kill a Divine Shield, and he needs to not draw his Shivala, but he also needs to push 7. So I think this was probably he took a line that almost always loses, but if it works, it's the only way he wins. I think that was like the most impressive game for me from this season.
I totally agree. I think it was me and you that were casting that series, right? And that play kind of melted our brain, but the more we thought about it, the more we realized that Muzzy was on the Giga Brain lines. But I do want to focus in back again to the global championships for you. You mentioned Fino. You mentioned how you want to have the big boy finals against Fino. Are there any other players out of the ones that have qualified that you have history against? Obviously, you know, you were talking about your record against Calento and how you've never played Tice. Like, is there anyone else standing out amongst the current global finals field for you?
Like that is currently qualified? Not really, because I didn't face PNC at all in any event.
Okay.
The Chinese needed the Chinese players, and like that's it, right? And then I also wanna face Purple. So I hope Purple he can still make it today, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my boy. I want to face Purple. I want to beat Purple in round 1 and then Fino in the finals.
Any last questions, Saber?
It's been a long journey for you, Casie. You have been a nearly man for quite a few years now. What do you feel is the difference for you now finally getting across the finish line, making it to the World Championship where you've come so close so many times before?
So it's just dedication, like what Fino said. He also had like last season was insane for him. Then he took a step back. Like that's what I did in season 1. I felt like my mindset was really bad last season. I just didn't enjoy what I was doing. I just prepared wrong. Then I took like the end of last season off because I was like, there's not much on the line. I want to play good, but I don't prepare as much. Took a break, and now I'm back. Like you have to play a lot. You need to gain the little edges. It's not guaranteed that you qualify, but just after, like the best example is Radu right now. He was 1-6. Then he started talking to us, and he was like, "Yeah, my mindset is actually not as good as I thought it is." And then he made a big comeback. Like it's just work on your mind. Try to prepare outside of the game, your decks, your bans, your pick and ban phase, your mulligan, and then if you get lucky or unlucky inside the game, it happens. Not much you can do. But I think the preparation in Hearthstone is more important than most people think it is, and that's also what I started doing again. Like at the start of season 1, I was like, okay, this is specialist. But yeah, like it's just preparation means so much. That's why Fino had an edge. He played the best Cyclone Mage last season. No one else picked it up as fast as him. He was better than everyone else in the deck, and that's why he basically beat everyone every day.
Well, Casie, I think that's a great spot and a great message to leave it on. One more time, congratulations. I'm very proud of you, and we'll see you at BlizzCon. Well done.
Yes. Bye.
What a guy, Eber. What a guy.
I love that he brought up mindset because Casie is an excellent technical player. He has a great mind for the game. He's a great deck builder. What really separates him is his relentless positivity toward the game. Even though it doesn't always show on camera when he's taking bad beats,
yes,
he gets frustrated just like everybody else does, and then he finishes his match, he walks away, and he gets right back out there.
And that's what I really do want to pick up on about what you're saying, because for Casie, it's not about like making yourself an emotionless Hearthstone playing robot, right? Like it's not like holding all these feelings in. It's not like allowing you to not feel like you're getting unlucky or getting frustrated in any given situation. I talk to Casie after just about every match, win or lose, and like he is immensely salty and frustrated when he loses a game, but it lasts for like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe an hour in the worst case. And then he's just back grinding Hearthstone again. He's back playing 100 games against Bunny Hopper in practice to prepare for the next week. You know, that's what he does. And he has this perspective of being able to just separate one thing from the other and keep going. And I think that's a big reason why he has come out on top. But we can take a look on how he got there today. Up until this point, you see the Europe's champion, Casie, kicking it off in an initial win over Silvername, where I feel like he did have the edge in the lineup. And then hunterace versus Yala, Abar, you and Frodown were lucky enough to cover that series.
We did. It was an interesting one from start to finish. Both players obviously members of Team Nordaveen. Jarla had a fantastic Season 2, I want to point out.
Yes.
The fact that he came so close is a heartbreaker yet again, but I expect to see him back on the BlizzCon stage at some point over his career. But it is hard to best the defending world champion. This season around, only Casie can claim that title.
Yeah. Absolutely do not want to sell the other two players short. Of course, we talked about hunterace a lot. hunterace is still an absolute lord, and I still think potentially the best that we have in the field of Hearthstone players right now. But Jarla, I've made the point several times, if you've been paying attention to the last few weeks, that I think just with a little bit of flipping of circumstance here and there, Jarla could have been hunterace in the previous year. I think they had very similar levels of come up and exposure at the same time, and a very similar quality levels of player. And Silvername absolutely has shown that he deserves the spot at this table, because he would have been one of the players that was questioned about, right? Because he's being invited as a community figure, and there are a certain group of people that will look at all of those players and ask whether they deserve to be in this spot. Season 1, I think he brought bad decks and he got punished for that. Season 2, he cleaned up that area of his gameplay. As Casie was saying, prepare correctly, bring better deck lists, get yourself an edge. But I think what has never been in question is just the way he plays the game. I think he's an incredibly solid Hearthstone player, and I think he deserves a lot of plaudits. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what Silvername can achieve moving forward.
Yeah, if I were Silvername, I would consider this season an incredible accomplishment, but today was Casey's day. He's got the mind of a champion, I would say, and I know you would agree. Anyone who's met him, been able to have a conversation with him, would say he's got the heart of a champion as well. So I am happy for him today.
Yeah, I think he's a very fitting person to take the road to BlizzCon, but we still have one more spot to be decided for BlizzCon, and you can see who that is going to be coming up next. Do not go anywhere, because we are rolling straight into the Americas region to find out who's going to be joining Tom60229 and Casie Season 2 at BlizzCon.